Hello, everybody. It's Alessandro from Innovate with Impact, hashtag small relief. I'm here with Rob Fitzpatrick today. Hey, Rob, how's it going?
Oh, it's going well. How are you?
Doing great. Thank you so much. I really have to thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate it. We just quickly had a conversation. I'm a big fan of your work, and so I'm super excited about this conversation between the two of us. But before we get started, would you mind quickly introducing yourself? Because I could not do that better than you.
So I'm Rob. I started my first company when I was about 24, 13 years ago? 23, I guess. And the went through Wise Combinator, was focused on the scalable startup. We were trying to figure out social advertising before Facebook or Twitter did, which obviously didn't work out, but got really hooked on startups, ran that business for about 4 years, raised some funding, had some good customers, but couldn't make it work. And really was frustrated that the feedback that I was getting from customers, they're saying, if you build this, we'll pay for it. And then I was like, yeah, we built it and you didn't pay for it. What's up with that? And it took me a while after that to start figuring out what went wrong. Those learnings eventually became the Mom Test book. And since then, I've been bootstrapping. I didn't want to raise funding for any of my future companies. So I've been working with friends, small companies. Pretty much after the first, they've all been, bootstrap, profitable, pretty easygoing. Right now, I'm working on some software and tools for independent authors, and yeah, really enjoying it. Spent a few years working, building tools for education, working with universities, helping support whatever, any sort of education program or courses. That was an agency business, designed and kickstarted a board game. So I've kind of been in a bunch of different, I did like the scalable, the bootstrap, the lifestyle. I've been in a few different areas. And yeah, now out in Barcelona, running a little business. There's four of us, and yeah, I'm having a good time.
I mean, you have a super interesting background with all the things that you have seen, and I can only highly recommend reading the Mom Test book. It really had a big impact on my life, but we'll talk about that in just a minute as well. So, how would you say, with your experience, also coming from the US, now living in Barcelona, and especially now with the most recent situation, how has your life changed? Let's say in the last, 3 to 6 months. What's been going on?
I mean, I'll probably have to zoom out a bit further than that because, like the lockdown, I'm here with my girlfriend and my dog, and it's Barcelona, and there's, friends in town. So it's like, it's not like anything's been terrible. It's been pretty peaceful here. But like a bit further, the kind of decade transition that I've been on was first being so obsessed with the idea of scale and the $1 billion business. And if it's not, if it's not $1 billion, it's not even worth doing. And you got to think big. And then eventually realize that, like, actually, let me just focus on the way I want to spend my days and the work I want to be doing and the customers I want to be hanging out with. Like, if I don't want to spend all my time doing marketing, I shouldn't make a business that relies on lots of marketing. If I don't want to have to go to the office every day, I shouldn't build that sort of business. And so over time, I think what's changed for me in my journey is realizing that you can choose the business that fits into your like short-term life goals and medium-term life goals, and not everything needs to be like sell the company first, get rich, and then I'll start living. So yeah, I'm really enjoying it, and I'm having a blast now with business. And also the other big change I've realized is I used to think risk was something you dealt with. It's like, if you're an entrepreneur, you have to be brave. You have to accept the risk. You have to suffer the consequences. And I went super broke. I got really busted up by my first company. And I was like, that sucked. I'm not doing that again. And after that, I realized that actually you can control the risk by the type of idea you choose. You choose an idea that plays to your strengths and that uses the connections you already have. And that saves you a year and it lets you test it so much faster. I was like, oh yeah, like risk is something you can manage and control. It's not something you go into blindly. So for me now, like, people are always like, my family and stuff, they're like, well, my distant family, my mom obviously understands, but my aunts and uncles, they're like, oh, entrepreneurship, it's so scary. Not everyone's up for that. And I'm like, I think having a job is the scariest thing in the world. Like, I can't have the rug pulled out from under me. But if you have a job, like, one person makes one decision and like, boom, you're in a tough situation. And now I think a lot of other people would agree with that, unfortunately, as the job losses mount up worldwide.
Absolutely. So I cannot agree more with this. Just going into, not being an entrepreneur because you think it's more safe or whatever, in the long run may or may not pan out, right? So you never really know. Plus also with the entrepreneurial spirit, you kind of have this, guarantee is the wrong word, but at least you're moving in a direction where you're building your own business and you kind of like taking life by the horns a little bit.
And you build up resources over time. Like, I think one of the big misconceptions about entrepreneurship is that it's one company. And everyone feels this way on their first company. They're like, and I think this is why, myself included, we tend to get so hurt financially and emotionally on our first company, because we can't imagine what life would be like if it failed. It's like, this is my only shot. This is my one shot. But actually, after you've had a couple companies, you go, oh no, it's like you have a couple jobs in your career, and you can build up skills and connections and resources and insights at one business and then take them to your next business. And obviously, you still take care of your employees and you treat your investors right. And like, there's ways to shut down a company properly and improperly. But if you do it properly, I really do feel personally, I feel like I'm building the skills and resources, and it's actually just a career path. You know, it doesn't feel like I'm starting over each time I start a new company. It feels like I've taken a stepping stone, and the next one's that much easier and that much bigger. Yeah, anyway, it's like, it's a career. It's not a company, you know? It's like,
highly relevant topic, right? So right now, and you mentioned it before as well, so a lot of people are going through distress right now and are trying to figure out, this is one of the reasons why I started this, these interviews, because I really want to share as much as advice as I can possibly give to other people. So you were talking earlier about managing your risk. Is there anything that you can share in terms of like advice, or maybe some key points that you think are really important there, especially in these times?
yeah, so the risk is some combination. Let's just say, for the sake of simplicity, you just multiply them all together. So it's something like how much time it's going to take until you can figure out that it's either worth quitting or worth continuing. So that's like your buy-in cost. So something like a social network is going to take you 2 to 5 years to figure out if it's worth continuing or quitting, maybe even longer. Whereas something like enterprise software or a productized service or a simple consumer app that you can, like, it might be a matter of a month. You know, you just have to have some conversations or build a quick prototype and get it in your hands. So that's immediately like the difference between a month's risk or 2 years of risk, just by that quality of the idea. Then it's also like what your monthly burn rate is going to be, which partly that's your personal life. But also, if you want to start up a restaurant, and let's say it's going to be a high-end theme restaurant, and it's going to take you a year to decorate and renovate it, well, now you're paying your rent and your mortgage and your maintenance and everything for a year before you can even find out if it's working. So that adds to your burn rate as well. And then there's like a general, like how uncertain is the validation signal going to be? So for example, if you're building enterprise software, you can talk to people, have a conversation, and they'll basically pay you in advance, or they'll give you a very clear signal that they have the budget. And so then you can have a lot of confidence. Like after my first company failed, then I did some goofy projects for fun, but then the next company I took seriously, myself and my co-founder, we'd both been through a similar experience of getting burned with our earlier company. And so we said, listen, we're only going to do this if people will pay us in advance. So we spent a week wandering around London, going into meetings. And by the end of the week, we had £50,000 of committed customer contracts. And we said, okay, we still need to do the work to deliver on this, right? It's not like free money. It's not in our pocket yet. And some of it ended up falling through. That's fine. It's not in your bank till it's in your bank. But like, it was enough that it made us feel like, okay, this is pretty safe, right? We've got a really clear signal. So if you combine those things, the clarity of the signal, the time until you get a signal, and the overall just like cost per month of getting there, and then you can manipulate those. And what Lean Startup does and customer development does is it improves your speed once you've started. But I think a missing piece that people don't appreciate enough is the idea selection, because Lean Startup can only improve speed, but it can't improve the other qualities, which are more anchored in the idea. So if you know like what your risk profile is, you can execute well. That's the Lean Startup customer development side. But then you can also pick the idea that fits you. And I hear people say it, especially in San Francisco, they go, shoot for the stars. You got to go crazy. Like Sam Altman and Paul Graham talk a lot about it. And I love them both. I respect them hugely. But they both say it's just as hard to make a small company as to make a big company. They say all companies are equally hard. And I got to say, maybe at the scale they care about, maybe that's true. But at the scale that like matters to an individual life, to me, that's not true at all. And I found that once I started picking the companies that I was pretty sure would work, then it's like, okay. And like at a certain point, I didn't have to worry about money anymore. And then I was like, oh, like my bills are paid for the rest of my life. This is cool. So I spent a while goofing around. I learned how to sail. I got a little boat. And then when I got back into business, I was able to be a bit more, after my hiatus, I was like, oh, okay, I can be a lot more ambitious again. Because like, I'm not worried about paying the rent. Whereas before that was always like, it's hard to be ambitious if you don't know where your rent money's coming from.
Yes and no, right? Because I mean, ambition can also come from the fact that you're just trying to figure out where to go next, and you just like want to push it really hard, right? It's just a little bit tougher if you have to worry about the next month's rent.
Yeah, well, yeah, there's different qualities. I have this theory. I don't know how true this is, but I have a theory that the reason so many great companies are started by young people isn't because the young people are necessarily smarter or anything like that. It's because young people have no dependents. And if they get wiped out, it doesn't really affect their quality of life. So, like, at a certain age and you got people counting on you and family and stuff, if you get wiped out, it's a pretty big deal. And like you're kind of a prisoner to a job then for several years to dig yourself out of a debt hole or to whatever. Whereas if you're young, like you go from sleeping on your sofa to sleeping on your friend's sofa or your parent's sofa. It like hasn't actually changed your life in any way to get wiped out. So like when my first company was wiped out and I was wiped out with it, I was like, I don't care. Whereas like now I would really care.
Yeah.
And so that you've got kind of like a natural safety net from being young, where just like you don't have far to fall, I guess. But then I don't know. At a certain point, I'd be pretty pissed off. I'm like, whatever. I dealt with it. I'd deal with it if I got wiped out, but I'd be pretty pissed off.
Of course, I mean, in the end, it's all about perspective, right? And the thing is, I totally agree with you, and this is a super valuable point. And for the young audience of this interview, if you're young and you're even remotely thinking about it, do it now. I mean, this is the time to really go out there, take all the risks, and really try. Because the older you get, the harder it's going to get. I think there's this illusion that it's going to get easier as you're going to get older. But the thing is, there's more responsibilities. There's this, and that. You're getting used to certain things, and before you know it, you're basically, like you said earlier, you're in a situation where it becomes that much harder to start your own business.
But there are advantages to being older as well. If you look at the age graph of when companies are started, successful companies, there's a peak. It's like bimodal. There's a peak around 25 years old, and there's a peak around 45 years old. And certainly, like what you lack in the ability to take reckless risks, you gain in terms of like you already know people and you know how to credibly present yourself to them. And there's a bunch of industries that you have a couple decades of experience with. So you've got insights. So there's a lot of advantages in both directions, but it's like, I guess the reason I mention it is because when I started my first company, I didn't even realize that was a thing I was meant to be paying attention to. And I was just charging blind off the cliff. And I think it's like, certainly the being able to make an intentional decision about the risk profile that suits you, I think it's a really powerful thing.
I cannot agree more. I think it's probably the most powerful thing, right? If you don't mind, let's talk a little bit about entrepreneurship. So do you have any key advice for people inside of businesses right now? Because there's a lot of changes happening there as well.
So with the caveat that I've never been an entrepreneur, I have done a reasonable amount of like working with corporates and innovation teams and like new divisions doing cool new technology. Like big company invents some amazing 3D technology, 3D printing technology, and they're like, great, what do we do with it? So I've done some work with entrepreneurs, and I think the biggest challenge is essentially the reporting hierarchy. So when I'm like my like specialty or my thing, I'm a programmer by background, but what I'm known for now is figuring out what customers care about by just talking to them. So not doing big formal research groups or anything like that, but just using casual conversations and chats to try to get beneath the biases and the protective shields and figure out what do they really care about and are they really going to buy this thing that we're building. And the challenge in an entrepreneurship context is the higher ups, the managers, want reports and they want statistical significance and they want guarantees. And that's not how my data looks ever. Mm-hmm. And when I work with teams who are entrepreneurs, like a big part of what I end up having to do is also coaching their boss and sort of saying like, look, if you demand statistical significance for early stage data, you're killing your own projects. I was working with this big German fast fashion company, like 7 billion a year in revenue, something like that. And, I was talking to all their C-level executives. It was this big room, like 30 people who were vastly more successful and smart than I'll ever be. And they were kind of coming up with ideas because they were getting their butts kicked by startups. And they're thinking, how can this happen? Like, we're this huge company. We've got infinite budget. We've got bajillions of customers. Like, how are we getting whipped so bad? And during that session, during that day, we spent like 8 hours together working through stuff. I was like, oh, this is why you're getting your butt kicked. And the reason was that they came up with a great idea, you know, like cool project, not guaranteed, of course, nothing is. And then someone did a bit of napkin math, and he goes, guys, there's not even a 50% chance that this does $1 billion in revenue within the first 3 years. There's, you know, this is meaningless. We should can it. And everyone goes, oh yeah, you're right. We can't do that. And it's like, but you were just complaining that you got your butt kicked by companies like Airbnb and Dropbox. And they're like, yeah, but they're doing, you know, 10 billion a year. That would matter. And it's like, yeah, but that starts, I mean, it doesn't even start with $1 billion, right? It starts with 100. It starts with 1,000. And just their reporting structure and their risk management structure essentially prevented them from trying anything new, because they had to justify their budgets. They had to do so I think you have to kick back on that, and that applies at like every level. But you know, Eric Ries has written a lot about this, and he's deeper in, so I'd follow his advice, or Alex Osterwalder, who you interviewed previously. I'd follow their advice more so than me, but that's always the problem that stands out to me when I deal with entrepreneurship. So I think if you can deal with the reporting, and if you can deal with the internal bureaucracy, then you've got a chance. If you haven't, I think you're really fighting an uphill battle.
I would love to pick your brain. So absolutely. And I would love to pick your brain a little bit. So a discussion that I see all the time, whether it be in the corporate world or with startups, is how many people do you need to talk to basically, you know, get the results that you need? So do qualitative research and kind of avoid this kind of like false positive situation that you also talk about, obviously, in your book.
So if you're doing incremental innovation, so like one of the companies I worked with for a bit was HP, Hewlett Packard, and I was working with a couple different divisions. And if you're doing incremental innovation, like you're building a new whatever, laptop or phone or something, you kind of know what people want, and then you do, or you make Procter and Gamble. If you're doing like consumer goods, you're like, okay, we know what they want out of shampoo, the focus groups, the research tools, all that works pretty well. If you're doing something innovative, like you switch over to 3D printing, or if you're trying to reinvent what a desktop computer means in the future, and like you don't think it's incremental anymore, you think it needs to fundamentally change, or you're trying to be like, you're trying to reinvent fast fashion, all of those tools become useless or even counterproductive, because what they do is they, it's like this is what sets you up for disruption, like the Jeffrey Moore. What am I blanking? Anyway, like the disruptive innovation stuff, where you keep doing this incremental thing that your existing customers want, but you miss the ability to do this small thing that destroys that business but becomes the next big business. So you need a totally different toolkit, and it's so counterintuitive to companies that are used to this, because you might talk to 5 people. In practice, 5 is probably too few. But like, I would rather see someone do 5 good conversations than survey 500,000 for these types of businesses, because statistical significance doesn't matter. Getting more bad data is not helpful. Like statistically significant bad data is still bad data, you know? Whereas like 5 conversations probably isn't enough, but at least you have a chance. At least you can realize like, wow, they don't care at all. Or like, wow, this just does not fit into their life. We need to reinvent everything. Like what we thought they cared about, they simply do not care about. And that comes out of these very human, messy conversations. And I like to say that if you can put the data on a report, the data was not worth gathering. Like if you can chart it, it's bad data. Like, because if you can chart it, you could have Googled it because someone else has already done that research, some industry body. Like the only data to me that is important, that's worth gathering, is the data that can't be graphed or charted, because it's these messy, like emotional, in their head decision-making. What makes them tick? Why are they doing? Imagine the segue. You hire a research company and they go out. Hey, do you hate being stuck in traffic? Do you think cars are a burden on cities? Do you want to get rid of pollution? Would you like to bring down your transportation costs? Like, would you like a city's more pedestrian friendly? That's going to be 10 out of 10 across the board, right? And then you look at the industry metrics for a segue. Wow, transportation in cities, $1 trillion industry or whatever. Like, like this was one of the most funded companies of all time, the Segway, because using traditional research tools, it looks like the greatest opportunity in all of history. And what they missed is actually people emotionally just don't feel cool when they're riding a Segway. And you're never going to get that from a survey. You're never going to get that from market research. You have to get it by talking to people and be like, hey, you know, here's this idea, you know, how do you get around? Oh, why don't you bicycle? Oh, would you ever use a scooter? Like, why not? Like,
Yeah.
hey, stand on this thing. How does it feel? And they're like, oh, it's really cool. It's like, oh, you know, why don't you borrow it for a couple of days? You can take it to work. They're like, no, I'm okay. It's like, oh, all right, you sure? I mean, like it's free. Um, and they just feel a bit silly. And so a bunch of investors lost hundreds of billions of dollars because people feel a bit silly when they're standing on a Segway.
Mm.
And like, those are the signals that matter for these like visionary leaps.
Mm.
Um, like all the market research said that the iPhone was going to be terrible, you know, small screen, limited features, et cetera. But they're like, nah, Steve's like, no, I've got this insight about like what people really want. It's not showing up in the market research.
Mm.
We're doing this. Like, you know, that's why these sorts of disruptive innovation and visionary product leaps like can't be done by computers, and often can't be done by big companies. You know, sometimes they can. And certainly if you're an entrepreneur, that's the opportunity, is to like get buy-in from the chain of command, and then accept that like you're not going to have the safety of
Mm.
statistical significance and a laminated report with lots of pretty graphs on it. Like,
Mm.
you're looking for these messy signals, and then you're making a leap. And you try to do that in the most sensible and risk managing way, but it's still always going to be a leap.
Yeah, and see, this is what I appreciate so much about your book, and I tell every an entrepreneur to read it because, and this is also why I asked the question about, you know, statistic significance and all that. And I strongly agree with you. What I have seen also in my own research, if you're going out there and you're having 5 really good interviews, and I'm talking about you're not, you know, asking the questions wrong, you're doing all the things that you're talking about in your book, you have so much already. I mean, a half an hour conversation with a client that you write down, and or you know, whoever it is, a prospect, whatever it is, but you're writing it down. You have these interview transcripts, and you can generate really cool insight reports, and that, I think, is extremely powerful. It can really help you launch pretty much anything if you're putting your mind to it.
And I will say, you still need to write stuff down. You still need to be rigorous. But what I like to write down is exact customer quotes and almost like a simplified transcript of the conversations. And then I'm playing back the raw data, not just a conclusion that's been turned into a number or an average. So when I sit down with my team, like on my little team, we all talk to customers and we all bring in learnings. And what we do is each week we have like a half hour where we all just walk each other through the main impactful things that were said and the interesting signals from all of that week's customer conversations.
Mhm.
And what that does is it loads the raw information, the kind of customer exposure, into everyone's heads. And then we can all use that when we make our next set of product decisions or strategy decisions or whatever.
Mhm.
Um, and I've seen some companies, like one of my favorite examples, one of the challenges startups have when they shift from being founder-led to kind of process-led and slightly larger organizations, usually happens around 20, 30 employees, that sort of size, is the learning slows down, because previously the founders were doing the learning and then making the product decisions. Whereas now, like, the founders start worrying about like strategy, partnership, high-level sales, fundraising, hiring, that sort of stuff. So someone else is making the product decisions,
Mhm.
and often like they're not as exposed to customers. So one of my buddies' companies, Songkick, they've now sold it, but they were in my cohort in Y Combinator, and we shared an office with them in London for a few years after we moved out there. Um, when they realized they had this problem, they're sort of like, their growth had slowed for about a year, and they made a few changes. They had some organizational changes as well. But one of the great things they did is every Friday, there were a mobile app for live music fans. So every Friday afternoon, they would have emailed some of their most active users who were based in London, said, hey, we're having a party at our office. We see you use Songkick a lot. It's going to be live music, free beer, meet the team. Come on in. We'd love to party with you.
Mhm.
The team takes Friday afternoons off and basically just drinks and hangs out and listens to music with their users. And that meant that everyone on the team was just exposed to real users who were the most passionate users.
Mhm.
And they just chat, oh, like, and they'd pull people away and they do user testing with, hey, you know, we've got a new version of the app. Would you like to take 20 minutes and see it? We're going to record you if that's okay. Oh yeah, I'd love to see the new version. Let's go. Boom, they're doing user testing. So they're having casual conversations at the party. They're doing user tests in their little room. The user testing team would collect all the video and compile it into a 10-minute like highlight reel of major lessons learned. And then on Monday at the all hands, they'd show the highlight reel from user testing. People would share if they'd learned anything interesting, and that was great. And suddenly their growth started to pick up. And it was just like, is that structured? Could you get away with that at like a 10,000 person company? Probably not, but like you solve the problem at the level of scale that the organization is currently at. And for them, that was an awesome and very time efficient answer. Because if you tell people, okay, your job is to program, but I also need you to spend 20 hours a week in meetings, that's just not going to fly. And that's going to destroy your productivity. So you need to find clever ways to integrate the learning into the activities people are already doing, or bring down the time cost. Otherwise, they're not going to do it, or it's going to be too disruptive.
Absolutely. And I've seen this as well in many different situations, but I think there is so much to be said about actually going out there and really kind of like, people are always asking for facts. It doesn't matter if you are working on a startup or if you're working in a corporate team. In the end, I think the more factual evidence that you can bring that, your clients really want something, the better it is and the easier it is for you to actually make that kind of a connection to your clients, and also making a convincing argument that you need to move in a certain direction. There's a statement, this quote from Henry Ford that I'm not going to do it justice right now because I don't have it completely memorized, but he basically said, if I would have asked my clients or prospects what they want, they would have said faster horses. I'm sure you've heard that before as well. Go somewhere along those lines.
Yeah.
What do you say about that statement?
So you never ask. So if you're doing visionary innovation, so if you're doing like big leaps, if you're doing incremental innovation, by all means, ask them what they want. And if they want a faster horse, build that and take their money. Like that's what mature companies do when they're exploiting a well-understood opportunity. But if you're trying to make a new product or do something innovative, you never ask people what they want. You never collect features. You never build a product by committee. What you do is that you try to understand their goals and problems and frustrations. You try to understand their current decision-making, what they already did and why. So if I was in that situation trying to understand the replacement for the horse, I might be asking questions like, hey, how do you get around? How did you get to your family reunion? How do you go to work? How do you travel the city? It's like, oh, you use a horse. Like, why do you do it that way? Like, what else have you tried? Have you tried carriages? Have you tried walking? Like, why don't you do this? Why did you switch to that? Do you ever take whatever? I don't know if they had a taxi equivalent back, but whatever. You're asking about what they're doing and why. And the why is important because you're trying to get into the decision making. You're trying to understand their like evaluation process. It's like with a metal detector, you're like starting at surface level and then you're digging. It's like, yeah, faster horse. Why do you want that? Like, what would that let you do? Like, why haven't you already bought a faster horse? Because clearly some horses are faster than others. And they're like, oh yeah, but the really fast ones are so expensive and they're only 5% faster. You go, oh, okay. Or they take so much more food and maintenance and exercise. You're like, okay, so low maintenance is actually a thing. Or like cost is still a factor. So they don't just want fast. And you can tease around this. And then, okay, so then you have to take your leap. There's two stages. Steve Blank calls it discovery and validation. I call it learn and then confirm. And you learn by asking about their life and decision-making and what they're already doing and why. And then you confirm by trying to get them to buy or use something. And that's where you're a bit more sales or analytics driven. And I think of it as like the learning, the customer understanding. It's like building the foundation, a solid foundation from which you can take your visionary leap. Now, your visionary leap might be wrong. And then you go, okay, that wasn't the right solution to that problem. Let me try something different. Let me do my product iteration. But if you don't have that solid foundation, then you're just gambling with ideas, right? And you see this all the time from technical people where they go, I got an idea for an app and they build it and they go, okay, that wasn't right. Maybe if I did it this way, and they try it and that's not right. And they're like, what about this? And that's not right. And the problem with this is it's binary feedback. It either works and great, you're rich, or it doesn't work, but you don't know why not. And your analytics tell you that people aren't using it, and your sales metrics tell you people aren't buying it, but they don't tell you why not. And so you have to start with that foundational understanding. Otherwise, it just takes too many of these blind gambles. And obviously, there's always someone who nails it on their first try, and then they write a bunch of obnoxious case studies about how you just need to trust your gut.
But like winning the lottery, right?
Yeah.
Well, I always say, ask the question why 5 times without getting punched in the face. So, it's kind of like this. And what I mean by that is, you want to go deeper and you want to figure out what's going on in that person's life, obviously without being obnoxious.
Another metaphor that I use, which I find useful, is it's like where you want to get to is like the level of understanding you have for your best friend or your siblings when you're buying them a gift. because you understand their life, which allows you to surprise them with a gift, which they didn't know they wanted, but which perfectly fits into their life. And that's what visionary product is like. People don't tell you what they want, but because you understand them, you're able to delight them with the iPhone, with Uber, with Instagram, with Facebook, with whatever. No one asked those product visionaries to build that thing, but because of their understanding of people, they were able to be like, I think this is maybe in the right direction. And then they can work from there to really optimize it. Whereas if you're buying a present for a stranger, like gift certificate, bottle of wine, you give them something generic. That's not the way you build a breakthrough innovation.
Yeah. And also not these long lasting relationships between you and the client, right? Which is ultimately what you want.
Hmm.
You have given me so much super cool information, to this audience. I really appreciate it, Rob. Which leads me to my very last question, and we talked a little bit about this beforehand. You had a really cool way of, going from the US to Spain. Would you mind telling me a little bit about this and where that currently stands?
So not all the way from the US, but when I was in London and when I was
London,
a bit
sorry.
burned out on startups, I had forever on my bucket list had been to learn how to sail. My parents met on a sailboat, and I'd always been like, oh, I'd love to learn how to sail someday. But like for 10 years, I'd just been so like, not quite that long, but for a while, I'd been so like stuck in startups. I was like, no, I can't take a week off. It's impossible. I'm so busy. And then finally, I was like, screw it. It's like, let's try it. And I did the little introductory course, and I was like, I'm probably not going to love it, but let's like give it a try. And I came back from that first week on the boat, and I woke up in bed the next day, and I still in bed, I got my computer and I opened it up to eBay and I found a boat and I clicked buy it now. And, I went and I picked up the boat. I still hadn't finished learning how to sail. But over the next kind of 3 years, I gradually moved the boat from England to Barcelona through the French canals. Dropped the mast, went through the canals, a million locks, super hot. But yeah, it was fun. And now it's in Barcelona. I was really looking forward to, as the lockdown ended, getting out on the water again. But unfortunately, I'm now stuck in the bureaucratic paperwork battle to get it registered in Spain. So it'll be a few more months still before I can use it. But then it'll be fun. We'll get out to the island, sail around the Med. It'll be really looking forward to it.
That sounds pretty amazing. I hope you get it out of there soon, and I hope you will be able to start using it very soon. Rob, listen, thank you so much again. It was really a super interesting interview. I definitely learned a lot. And in return, I want to give back a little something. This book, The Mom Test, everybody that watches this, I highly recommend buying it. And not only that, I'm going to give away 3 of those books. So I'll ask a question on LinkedIn, and the first 3 people to answer that question correctly will get the book for free. Thank you so much again, Rob. I hope we'll keep in touch and maybe meet one day in person.
My pleasure. I look forward to it. And if anyone wants to find me, robfitz.com has all my contact details and links to the book and stuff like that. So yeah, I wish you guys luck with your projects and your businesses, and give me a shout if I can be useful.
Sounds great. Ciao, Rob.
Bye.